This is LBC from Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Speak to Sadiq. The Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, takes your calls.
4 minutes after 10 is the time, and it is that time again. It comes around, doesn't it? Just when you least expect it, Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, is in the studio. Good morning.
Good morning. It's a lot easier without there being hundreds of people in the audience, as we were at the Indigo at the O2.
It was a good one, wasn't it?
It was really good. And the energy, although you give some energy, James, not quite the same energy here in the LBC studio as there is in the O2 Indigo.
Focuses the mind. It's scary as well. I mean, to have all those... the whites of all those eyes staring back at you. And of course, you also can pass on any difficult questions to your deputies, which is not an opportunity that you can avail yourself of in this.
Another downside of being in the LBC studio
in this context. Exactly that. Will you be appearing on any picket lines in the coming days?
Well, I have in the past appeared on picket lines. And I think it's really important to make sure we understand that actually the genesis of all these problems, the root cause of all these problems, are government policies. It's either the government, pulling the strings of their oil companies, or not giving, whether it's their oil companies, whether it's TfL, whether it's the NHS, whether it's our schools, the monies they need to give their workers a decent pay rise.
So no, you won't be appearing on any picket lines in the coming days. Tomorrow, for example.
No, I mean, I'm afraid I won't, simply because of pressure of work and stuff. But I think it's really important for...
So you would do otherwise?
Absolutely. Listen, the trade unions have been a real force for good to our country over the recent weeks, months and years. And I'll give you the best...
Would that be a sackable offence for you? I don't want to preempt any callers' questions, but would you not run the risk of getting fired if you turned up on a picket line?
I think Londoners would, who are my employers.
From the party?
No, listen, I mean, there are members of our party, who've been on picket lines in the last few weeks, months and years. What's really important, though, is for people to understand, those who aren't members of a trade union, the benefits everyone receives by the campaigning trade unions do. And the best example in recent times, James, is during the pandemic. It was the trade unions who worked with us to make sure public transport was safe, not just for their staff, and by the way, more than 100 transport workers lost their lives, but for commuters as well. It was the trade unions in the NHS, in our schools, in transport and so forth, who worked incredibly hard. And as a trade unionist, I'm incredibly proud of the work they've done.
I suspect that this issue will return in the course of the coming minutes. Shall we turn to the phones and find out?
Wow, I've got loads of callers. I'll do them in order. I've got them down on my iPad. First one is Hector from Ledbury. Good morning, Hector.
Good morning, James. Good morning, Sadiq. My question to you, Sadiq, is with Sam Tarry's sacking yesterday and Liz Truss appearing destined for number 10, it appears as though Labour is no longer the party of working people, and the Conservatives are no longer the party of sound fiscal policy. So my question to you is a two-parter. Firstly, what's kind of your reflection on that? And also, what is your advice to a centrist voter who feels totally unrepresented for the past decade?
Well, just let me clarify for people who don't know. Sam Tarry, a shadow transport minister who was fired from his ministerial job yesterday after, I suppose, breaching the party line on picket lines, not just standing on one, but giving interviews to the media, and also, I think, facing deselection in his own constituency as well, which may or may not be pertinent. But what have you got to say to Hector?
Well, Hector, you mentioned your disillusionment over the last 10 years. I'd remind you in a polite, courteous way, for the last 12 years, we've not been in power. We've not been in government. And the Conservatives have had a Prime Minister for the last 12 years, the first 5 years, by the way, in coalition with the Lib Dems. And of course, many people share your frustrations about the policies of this government, which are leading to the sort of strikes we're seeing across various sectors this summer. And the job of the Labour Party is to make sure we represent ordinary people like yourselves, ordinary families like yours, I suspect, across the country. And so, look, a couple of things, and I think we've got to disentangle the two issues you mentioned in your two-parter. Firstly, my understanding is, and I've not had a chance to speak to Sam or Keir, both of whom are dear friends, is firstly, Sam wasn't sacked for joining a picket line. My understanding is it was for not following the process a member of the shadow front bench should follow when they're doing media and the lines they give to media. So be under no illusion, the Labour movement is very much the Labour Party and the trade unions, and I'm really proud of that link. Secondly, we should be worried about what Liz Truss is suggesting in relation to basically taking away the tool in the toolkit trade unions have to go on strike. And by the way, Hector, somebody who deals regularly with trade unions, no trade unionist, whether the General Secretary or a member, wants to go on strikes. It's because they're at the end of their tether. They've got no other tool in their toolkit that ultimately they've got to put down their tools and go on strike. And that's why it's incredibly important to try incredibly hard to resolve disputes amicably rather than the government pulling the strings almost to create this summer of discontent. So it's them versus us, the government, people against trade unions. Let's not fall into that trap.
Hector, do you want to come back to the Mayor? You don't have to.
If that's all right, thank you very much.
Briefly, though.
Yeah, I mean, just to help. I mean, I'm sort of cautiously supportive of the strikes, and I wasn't quite clear exactly on your response regarding the sacking of Sam Tarry. So what exactly was that reason? I know you've said it before, but it was just not clear.
So Hector, apologies, it's my fault, not yours. All I know is from what I've read in the media and what Sam said and what Keir Starmer's office have said, which is that the sacking was not for Sam Tarry being on the picket line. There are other members of the front bench who have been on the picket line in recent weeks who haven't been sacked. My understanding is that because the shadow cabinet and shadow ministers have got to have collective responsibility, it's a boring process point, but you've got to do two things. One is to make sure when you're doing media, your lines are consistent with the shadow cabinet's policy, and secondly, that your line manager, in this case the shadow secretary of state, knows you're doing media, and those processes are followed. And bear in mind, the Labour Party wants to be a government in waiting, and is, in my view, a government in waiting. Those rules apply both in government and also when you're, Her Majesty's official opposition. And I speak to somebody, by the way, who used to be a minister, and it would frustrate the hell out of me, having stayed in my lane, just talk about the area I'm the minister of and not be able to go outside the policy agreed at shadow cabinet or at cabinet. But that's what, being a member of the shadow cabinet or shadow minister means, I'm afraid.
I didn't realise that the RMT disaffiliated from Labour as long ago as 2004 and even voted against rejoining the party when Jeremy Corbyn was the leader in 2018. So I mean, I suppose most of us think of the trade union movement and the Labour movement as being inextricably entwined, but these two institutions are not entwined at all anymore.
For a long time, and look, not every trade union needs to be affiliated to the Labour Party, and the Trade Union Congress has many trade unions who aren't affiliated to the Labour Party. We encourage trade unions to become affiliated to the Labour Party because we are a movement. The Labour movement is bigger than the Labour Party and bigger than trade unions. They're teamwork. And by the way, the Labour Party was formed from workers who'd organised into trade unions because collective bargaining is a better way to get better terms and conditions for yourself. But trade unions aren't just about producers, their members. They're also about consumers, citizens. And there are many examples, I speak as a proud trade unionist, of their trade unions bringing benefits to wider society because of the bargaining they do. Sometimes, by the way, they have to go on strike to reach the improvements they want to reach.
Which is what's happening on your watch, isn't it, in August, when London Underground workers will stage a fresh strike in their long-running dispute with you over jobs and pension.
Yeah, and my frustration in relation to this is, look, before the pandemic occurred, before we had, coming out of the pandemic, we'd managed to reduce strike action in London since I became mayor by about 75%. So before I was mayor, the previous mayor had never met the trade unions in 8 years as mayor. I meet them regularly, all of them, by the way, those affiliated, those not affiliated, and that's led to working with the trade unions. We've made massive savings. We've reduced the amount of jobs in TfL, reduced the amount of agency staff in TfL, really have reduced the deficit in a big way and reduced the number of strikes. Because of the pandemic, because of the conditions the government's attaching, RMT are nervous about the conditions of their members and have gone on strike. And the point I'd make, and again in a polite, courteous way to the RMT, is the wrong people are being punished as a consequence of your strike action. It's not TfL, it's not Londoners who are responsible for the concerns that you have. And in a way, you're letting Shaps and the government off the hook by going on strike on August the 19th. And I'm really hoping they'll reconsider.
Their contention is that you haven't told them what's in the funding settlement you've received from the government, and they need to know what's in it in order to be assured on the issues of jobs, pensions and working conditions.
Well, firstly,
so can't you just tell them?
They're right. We've not shared with them what's in the draft proposal from the government for the simple reason it's market sensitive in relation to... So even at the TfL board meeting yesterday, these are members of the TfL board aren't aware what's in the draft proposal, because in the Commissioner's words...
Because it will affect the share prices of private sector companies that work in the...
No, TfL ostensibly is pension is private in relation to this, but also we're listed and so forth, and we borrow. The issue is not we're listed, I beg your pardon. The issue is we borrow.
So it
affects yes.
The terms of your loans.
It's market sensitive, and so even members of the board aren't aware what's in the draft proposal. But I just want to reassure the RMT in relation to the concerns they have, which are basically three categories: jobs, conditions and pensions. That's at the fore of our mind as well in relation to this, because those things help us deliver the world's finest transport authority there is, which is TfL.
So you would look an ordinary member in the eye, or indeed you would look Mick Lynch in the eye and say, trust me, the settlement's all right on those three fronts? No,
what I'd say to Mick Lynch is firstly, thank you. For all trade unions, their workers, honestly. James, one of the saddest things I had to do was write letters to families saying, giving my condolences because they lost their life for doing the right thing. So firstly, it's thank you, and genuinely sincere, and I mean it. Secondly is the conditions from the government are tough. They've been tough for the last 2.5 years. Right. Trust me in relation to trying to argue to get the best possible deal for our city. That means both the citizens, those who come into our city, but also our workers. And fourthly, work with me. We're on the same side here in relation to lobbying the government, getting public opinion on our side to make sure the government's proposal isn't anti-London, which, by the way, is anti the country's economy, because you don't get a national recovery without a London recovery. You don't get a London recovery without TfL firing all cylinders. And so we're on the same side here. Let's work together.
And I would add that Mick Lynch is my guest on this week's Full Disclosure, which will drop a little later than usual because we're actually conducting the interview after tomorrow's show. 10:15 is the time. Should we take another call?
Yeah, loads of calls this morning. The second one is
there always is.
Well, I've been told not as many as when I'm on with you, James, but there you go.
Who told you that, mate?
Second one's from Finsbury Park. It's Zan. Good morning, Zan.
Good morning, Mayor. Last week, I sent you a dossier about sexual harassment crisis on TfL with 20 pages of testimonies of assault from girls as young as 11, which you have ignored. I was victim to harassment on the tube in January and told by British Transport Police there was nothing they could do as all tube carriage CCTV deletes after 72 hours. Your current media campaign does not go far enough. So where are all the police officers on tube carriages? Where are the rape alarms on buses? Where is the working CCTV that can actually prevent this violence against women from happening on TfL?
Well, Zan, very sorry if you've not got a response to your letter. Just so you know, I do know about it, and we've discussed it, and you should have had a response, but apologies you haven't. You'll get a response, and we will meet with you. And secondly, I'm really sorry about the experience you've had, which is not uncommon for women and girls in our city. I can't promise you a rape alarm on every single bus or a police officer in every single carriage as you just referred to. What I can promise you is we have 2,500 police officers who go around the underground to try and make sure it's safe as possible. We are making sure that we make more progress in relation to tackling any crime on the underground, and that includes encouraging people to report what happens on the underground. And I'll be the first to admit my experience on public transport as a man is very different from yours as a woman, and that's why it's really important that TfL take seriously any complaint made to them from women and girls, and we encourage women and girls to make those complaints. I supported, by the way, the change in the law to make upskirting a criminal offence because, again, as a bloke, nobody's tried to take a photograph of me inappropriately, and it's really important we have a zero tolerance towards that. I can't pretend, though, that ending violence against women and girls is simply a policing matter or a TfL matter every 3 days.
Extending CCTV storage for longer would be quite straightforward.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons why we agreed, and apologies, and it's not happened, to meet with you in relation to this issue. There's a number of issues in relation to CCTV. Some trains haven't got CCTV, the older trains. We're making sure, though, Zan, every new train we buy has CCTV on them. It's difficult to retrofit CCTV in some of our older trains. It's just not possible to do so, particularly when we're about to procure new trains. But I'm not going to pretend that reducing violence against women and girls is simply a policing issue. And that's one of the reasons why I welcome Liz Truss announcing yesterday what I've been talking about for months now, about simple things. Make sexual harassment in a public place a criminal offence. Make misogyny a hate crime so it's properly recorded. Make sure we're dealing with this in our schools in relation to, education of our children, particularly boys, but also in relation to dealing with sexism, misogyny before it becomes abusive and a crime like you've experienced. But Zan, we do take these issues you've raised. And I've read the 19 various other complaints raised by women in London, and we'll be working with you to address some of these issues, but I'm not going to pretend all the issues you've raised can be addressed by us, particularly, by the way, when we've not got a deal from the government about both revenue or capital.
So some of them could be, though, couldn't they?
Absolutely.
As we've alluded to, most obviously, perhaps alarms on buses and cameras on trains.
And Zan, just to reassure you, we have made sure all our staff, that includes bus drivers and those in the underground, are better trained in relation to how they respond to a complaint made by you. We have made sure there are staff at every single station. We have made sure there's better signage in relation to them, not just people reporting it, but better lit areas of public realm. But, every 3 days, someone in the country, a woman, is murdered by a man. So it really is an epidemic of violence against women and girls.
Zan, what was your treatment like apart from the outwardly unbelievable facts about the CCTV? Did you feel respected and listened to when you brought your complaint to the police?
I would just like to add that I was told that we only had 72 hours for the evidence, but that time had passed because she'd been on annual leave.
Right.
So, in my opinion, she should have passed the case to someone who was going to be present when I was calling, because that's a very, very small window for victims to come forward. So it's incredibly important that every hour there's somebody available at the other end of the line to take this issue further.
Fair enough.
Zan, I can't disagree with anything you've just said or rebut that, because it's patently common sense and the obvious thing to do. And my concern is that person has got away with it, and who knows how many other people he's treated the way he treated you.
And keep in touch with us as well, Zan, if you would, so that we can check that the Mayor's response is as fulsome as he is promising.
Thanks, Zan. Thanks for your call. And I promise you we'll be in touch. And after this, I'll text my office to make sure that's happened as well, Zan. The next caller is from Barnet, and it's Kevin. Good morning, Kevin.
Good morning, Mr. Khan. Good morning, James.
Hello,
Mr. Khan, back in 2018, in a Mayor's question, it was raised with you that air conditioning on London buses did not function. You said you were going to deal with it. In 2019, the air conditioning on London buses still did not work. In 2020, summer, you turned the air conditioning off because of COVID. But in November of the same year, you appointed a contractor to come in and upgrade the air conditioning system on London buses. In July last year, 21, Jason called, another bus driver, called into the show and told you that the air conditioning on London buses was still not working. Well, Mr. Khan, in 2022, we had 40 degrees in London. It was 44 degrees inside a bus cab, and the air conditioning still does not work. And to make this even worse, 25% of London bus routes don't have a toilet at one end. So drivers can't rehydrate, drivers can't cool down. What are you going to do about it this time, Mr. Khan?
So, Kevin, sorry, you're saying there's no air cooling. It's air cooling, not air conditioning. Air cooling in the cab or in the bus?
In the cab. Bus drivers are driving around in bus cabs. I've seen temperatures of 44 degrees.
That's illegal for a start.
And you said last year you were going to contact Jason, who called in. I've spoken to Jason. He had no follow-up.
No, he did. That's not correct. And that he did a follow-up because every time I come back on LBC, I make sure, and it's just a fact, James, that the promises I made in the previous speech to Sadiq have been actioned. So that's not accurate. In relation to the air cooling, that has been resolved, and so let me.
Well, he's in a bus. You're a bus driver.
No, I understand. So
it's not been resolved, Mr. Khan.
Right. Well, let me go back and check that because, and again, before I come on Speak to Sadiq next month, I'll make sure I've got a response so I can next time when I'm challenged say it's been responded. But let me be frank. 41 degrees. We aren't ready for that. All right. We aren't ready for 40 degrees. We're not ready for mid-30s as a city. Put aside buses, tubes, homes, places of work, the public realm. We are not ready for the consequences of climate change, and we'd have to spend billions of pounds just on public transport to get our public transport fit for purpose for 40 degrees. That's no excuse, by the way, if the air cooling isn't working in the cabin. So, Kevin, I promise I will take that away, and if you're willing to give James your number, I will separately ring you today to give you the answer in relation to me being reassured that the air cooling is working. In relation to the toilets, by the way, when I first became mayor, I made sure, because it's an issue of dignity, but also women bus drivers have real challenges, particularly when they're on their period, if there aren't toilets for obvious reasons. And I was ridiculed in my first 18 months when we put in more than 100 toilets in various routes across London, because some of them were temporary toilets, some of them didn't look very attractive, and the residents complained. And it was a big campaign from many Tories and anti-trade unionists about why I had acceded to Unite's request, United Trade Union, another example, by the way, James, of the benefit of trade unions, of having bus drivers having access to toilets. I'm not aware of the routes you referred to, Kevin, but I appreciate you may want to keep anonymity. If you were to give James the routes where there aren't loos, again, I'll look into that, because in 2022, it's not acceptable for a bus driver not to have access to a toilet at both ends of a journey.
Not to be pedantic, I don't know whether you were ridiculed or not, but the complaints were fairly valid. People didn't want portaloos at the bottom of their front gardens, did they?
No, there was
ridicule
about my priority, my first year being loos for bus drivers, right?
Okay.
But it is important for bus drivers to have access to loos and so forth. The alternative, by the way, was bus drivers being criticised for, male bus drivers for going to the toilet on the side of a wall of people's homes and stuff, because they're so desperate to go for a pee, or parking their buses to go to, a McDonald's to go to the toilet and so forth. So that's why I was perfectly happy to be ridiculed in my first year.
My workload is getting bigger with every call at the moment. All of the following up and checking back.
James,
I thought it was supposed to be an easy hour for me.
Well, no, James, the reason why I say this is because I should be held to account, but also I need to be reassured that people like Kevin, and he mentioned Jason, have had their calls, actions. So this is a way. I mean, you can separately, Kevin, email City Hall, or contact me in City Hall. But this is a good way of the checks and balances to make sure.
For sure.
This concern, which is upsets me, Kevin, that bus drivers haven't got the toilets that you're mentioning. The air cooling, again, I was reassured that's been action. Again, I'll follow both those things up.
I suppose we should give you some credit there for talking about bus drivers for about 8 minutes without mentioning your late father.
Well, but on a serious note, that's why it upsets me.
I know,
James, in another life, my father's passed away, but in another life, Kevin will be my dad. Imagine not being able to go to the loo, but imagine if you're a woman bus driver on a pit. It is upsetting, and it shouldn't be happening, Kevin. And I apologise profusely if it has happened. So I'm not going to pretend that there isn't a route where there's no access to a toilet, or that your bus drivers haven't had a big problem. Bus drivers have had a big problem, particularly Monday, Tuesday last week, as have tube drivers, as have people who work in a building that's really, really hot. Think about those who work in buildings where the temperatures have been very hot, or those in whose own home is incredibly hot. And that's one of the reasons why I'm passionate about energy efficiency, about dealing with the consequences of climate change, about dealing with the causes of climate change, because we can't allow 40 degrees to be the new norm. We simply can't.
Well, we will make sure that you do get back in touch with Kevin, and we'll perhaps hear from Kevin and even Jason again. And when you mention anonymity, that's because these lads work for, and these women
the
work
concern
for,
they've got, the concern
private
they've got,
sector companies who may be a little bit unsympathetic to them.
The concern I've got for Kevin and other bus drivers, it's an issue that's been raised to me in a number of fields, whether it's the Met Police Service, whether it's private bus operator companies, is if they are, inverted commas, a whistleblower, dobbing in their employer, will they get in trouble? They shouldn't, but I can understand why people are nervous. They may. So wherever you work, if it's the fire service, the police service, a private company who has a contract with TfL, London Underground, if you've got a concern, I want you to feel safe letting me know about these issues without being worried about reprisals.
27 after 10 is the time. I'll take another call in just 1 second. Just your thoughts on Boris Johnson's current situation. I mean, specifically the fact that he's not going to be Prime Minister for much longer, and then also your thoughts perhaps on the meeting with Alexander Lebedev.
Well, my first starting point is, look, I read this morning that the energy bills of Londoners and those across the country in January could be as high as £500 a month. The cap is going to be north of £3,500 a year, and at the same time, people like Centrica are making profits of 1.3 billion, as indeed are Shell. Now, what a Prime Minister should be doing is focused on dealing with that outrage about massive profits for these companies and families basically choosing between, in winter, heating and eating, in summer, turning on a fan or not, because the choice is so difficult. Parents skipping a meal to feed the kids. And what our Prime Minister, to feed the kids, what our Prime Minister should be doing is focused on that. That should be an obsession when he or she wakes up in the morning and goes to bed, not fulfilling a boyhood dream to be a poor man's middle-aged Tom Cruise flying a private plane, holding a lavish party in Chequers. This guy's clinging on to power, not because he wants to improve people's lives, but because he's a junket king. And so it does make me angry, because I speak to people every day. Kevin's a good example. If we had decent investment in public transport, he would have decent facilities to drive in. If we had decent investment in, crime prevention, Zan and other women would feel safe, and so forth. And then we hear, by the way, this information was dragged out of him, through the liaison committee. The liaison committee are the chairs of the various select committees, cross-party chairs, some Tory, some Labour, some Lib Dem, I think some maybe SNP, who every few months get a chance to question the Prime Minister. And we now discover, because of their excellent questioning, that when he was the Foreign Secretary, by the way, he was meeting somebody, and this is a fact. A former head of the KGB questioned what his involvement.
I
was.
don't know if he was the head, was he? The KGB.
I thought the London branch, but you know better than I do. So apologies. Without having officials present, without having security present, and so forth. And just think about the context of Putin, what Putin's been doing, the concerns we have about security. He's a foreign secretary. The potential, when we know from our history, of politicians being blackmailed and so forth. And that's why it raises concerns. Look, probably nothing inappropriate happened. Probably Boris Johnson didn't divulge anything he shouldn't have done. And probably, there wasn't information on Johnson that could lead to blackmail in the future. But why take the risk? Why not have officials present? Is a party in Italy so important you need to compromise national security? Now, look, these are legitimate questions which Johnson should be answering to reassure us there are no problems. For me, though, it goes to an issue of judgment, right? Because, it's an issue of judgment. And this is one of the reasons why, by the way, many of us thought Johnson was not fit to be the Prime Minister. And both Truss and Sunak, and many of those in the Conservative Party, and all of those in Parliament, supported, defended and enabled this guy to be our Prime Minister. And he still is.
Which would you prefer to win from the point of view of a senior Labour politician, someone who may be in the cabinet or the shadow cabinet in the future? Who would you rather be up against, Rishi Sunak or Liz Truss? Yeah,
you obviously want the weaker opponent. If you think about it as a boxing match.
Yes and no, because you've also, if they will be in charge of the country for a while. So,
that's my point. The point I was going to make was so I answer this, in terms of both party interest and national interest. I want whoever wins to deal with the issues, cost of living crisis, inflation, security, violence against women and girls, and so forth. So the tribal politician, wants the weaker candidate to win, but the patriot wants the better candidate to win. Whoever wins, in my view, should call a general election, because my view is both a continuity Johnson, and we need to give the British public the option of a fresh start, and that's a general election with a Labour government led by Keir Starmer.
So you're going to give me a name?
No.
Okay. Can I ask you about the personal impact of an Asian Prime Minister if it were Rishi Sunak to win the...
Listen,
does it matter? If you disagree with the politics completely, does the shared ethnicity matter to you? And you can only answer for yourself on this issue, but as a white bloke, I'm very interested.
It does. Look, there's two issues. One is the Conservative Party deserve credit, because whoever wins is making history. The third woman Prime Minister, we've had zilch, although we've had two temporary leaders. The first ethnic minority, who, by the way, he's not just an ethnic minority, he's a religious minority.
Yes.
It is a big deal. Now, the fact is, the challenge for either of them is to address the inequalities that women and minority and people of colours and minorities suffer. That's the challenge for both of them. Curry, whether they're going to do that, bear in mind the track record of the last 12 years. But you can't escape the fact, James, that a person of colour growing up in our country is going to be seen the most powerful person in the country who looks like them, who's a person of colour, who's a religious minority as well as an ethnic minority. It is a big deal. And similarly, as the father of two daughters, bearing in mind that the impact the Lionesses are having on physical fitness, on girls thinking they can be elite sports people, think about a third female Prime Minister. And, and that should make us proud. The issue is what they will do and how they will deliver as, a woman, which Liz Truss clearly is, and Rishi Sunak as an ethnic minority and a religious minority. And by the way, there are countries, in the Western world, particularly, in other parts of the globe, who will be envious that we've got the situation, and I wish both of them, whoever wins, for the national interest reasons, James, the best of luck. Clearly, I'm hoping they call a general election so we can have a fresh start.
Do you think they will?
No, because I've seen the polls.
Yeah.
But the important thing is in my view, for the British public to get a chance. What should have happened, by the way, is Raab as the deputy PM should have become the caretaker PM, allowed Johnson to make his millions.
Are you sure? Is that a precedent? I'm not sure that is a precedent. I mean, when has that happened before?
Well, we've not had in a similar situation deputy prime minister before. So what's happened in the past is not a prime minister who's caretaker, who's flying planes and throwing hand grenades and having lavish parties at Chequers.
And at the JCB
same
owners' mansion as well. They're having a big party there soon.
Yeah. At the same time as we're facing the crisis we're facing across the country, where the waiting lists on the NHS is just remarkable in relation to there are more than 6 million people waiting for treatment on the NHS. Real problems in recruitment in the NHS, nurses, doctors, and so forth. And he's having lavish parties.
We've got time for one more call.
Let's do it. The next caller is Plamina. I hope I got that right, from Canary Wharf.
Yeah, you did. Hello.
Hi, morning.
Morning. Nice to speak to you.
You too.
My question is regarding rent in London. So private rent in London rose by 34% in 1 year in some areas. These numbers exceed the drop of rent seen during the pandemic. And my question basically is, are you planning to take any actions to protect the tenants of this city, like me, from the abuse of estate agents and landlords?
So this is the issue that causes Londoners the most concern, because a third of Londoners now renting privately. Yes, is the answer, with the limited powers I have. So during the pandemic, we managed to persuade the government to put a moratorium, a stop on private tenants being evicted because of failure to pay the rent for obvious reasons. We've also managed to persuade the government not to have tenants paying a fee to the estate agents when they move tenancy. And we've also managed to persuade the government to have a register of dodgy landlords. So we're making progress with the government. What the government needs to do is two big things. One is to freeze private rents in London for the next 2 years. That would save you about £3,000 of those 2 years, because you simply can't afford, many people I speak to, with your wages not going up with the cost of living, with rents exceeding even inflation, you can't afford to make ends meet. So what Londoners are doing is going to smaller homes, overcrowded accommodation, and they're really struggling. And the second thing the government should be doing is to give me the powers to have rent controls. The argument the government have is let the market decide. We shouldn't interfere with the market. The market isn't working for the reasons you've highlighted. So I'm lobbying the government to give me the powers to have rent control.
But they won't, will they?
Well, there's a general election around the corner, and if these guys won't, Plamina, it's another reason for there to be general election, for people like you to be given the opportunity to vote for a party that is willing to give me the powers to have rent control. So we can make sure in London, people like you who are working, and it will take us some time to build the homes we need in relation to the demand for homes. But until we have the right supply meeting the demand, we've got to control that the rents private landlords charge.
And to the landlord who says, well, my energy bills are going up, my rental incomes are my only income, my cost of living is rocketing as well. It's basic economics that I put up the price of the service that I provide. What do you say to them? So
what we want to do is set up a private rent commission, and on that commission we would have, landlords as well as tenant representatives, as well as economists and those in developers, to make sure we didn't inadvertently in effect either the pipeline of properties that are available on the market for you to rent, or the pipeline of homes to be built. Some landlords, the commercial landlords, the build-to-rent landlords, do give security for tenants in relation to they want to evict you, and to give you security in relation to the rent increase over the next 3 years. Other landlords, it may be their pension, and there may be a good reason why they've got to increase their rents. Other landlords, though, frankly speaking, are just making profit because they know the demand doesn't meet the supply. And we would, as part of our private rental commission, look at those issues.
Just a little thing. I guess I've fallen into this trap as well, and my colleague Natasha Devon has pointed it out, that Rishi Sunak wouldn't be the first ethnic or religious minority
I know.
Prime Minister because of Benjamin Disraeli.
Yeah. I talk about person of colour, but Natasha's spot on.
As always, to that. You can hear Natasha show on LBC at the weekend. And speaking of doing your homework, final question, just a bit of fun. Nadine Dorries has just told journalists that we haven't had a sporting event like this in the UK since the 2012 Olympics, as she welcomes the opening of the Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. Can you spot the flaw in what the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport has just said?
Well, hopefully she'll be watching the game on Sunday, and she'll be seeing the brilliant job that the Lionesses do on Sunday, finally bringing it home. In relation to big sporting event.
Well, in relation even to the Commonwealth Games.
What's the quote?
She said, we haven't had a sporting event like this in the UK since the 2012 Olympics.
Yes, of course. There's been Commonwealth Games in the UK, and I'm sorry Nadine missed those, and she'd go and watch.
Where were they?
Well, I know City play in a former Commonwealth stadium. Glasgow, of course, is the one that people remember, simply because I saw Sir Chris Hoy. This is me name-dropping Chris Hoy, who I saw last week. Chris Hoy, a Scottish Commonwealth Games champion as well. But listen, if that's the most objectionable thing that you have against Nadine, James, then she'll be very happy.
It's coming up to 22:11. Sadiq Khan, Mayor of London, many thanks.
It's a pleasure.
And I will. I've got a long list now.
Yeah, I've got Zan and Kevin in particular. I'll get back to you.
And I may chase Jason back up as well and find out about those toilets. But thank you for your time.
Stay safe.
As ever. Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines. It is 10:43 and time to... we've spent so much time together now over the years that you know what goes through my mind at this point in proceedings. I enjoy the monthly interactions with the Mayor, even when it does add to my workload instead of, as I often hope, diminish my workload, because it kind of produces itself, that part of the programme. As in, I don't have to come up with any ideas of what we need to talk about. But it's always rather hard work to get a conversation off the ground, off the back of it, because it's that change to the model. We are creatures of habit, aren't we, I think? And that's the first thing that goes through my mind when we come back from the bulletin that bookends the Mayor of London's monthly appearance on the programme. So we're going to talk about Labour. And we're going to talk about strikes, we're going to talk about Keir Starmer, and we're going to talk about Sam Tarry, which probably wasn't a name you were familiar with, and in fact may still not be a name that you are familiar with until yesterday. He was a shadow transport minister, and the role has been removed. He's been removed from that position because he did a full media round yesterday from a picket line in large part without telling the Secretary of State for Transport in advance that he would be doing so. The quote from the party, or a quote from a source speaking to The Guardian, is that this represents a total breakdown of discipline and put the leadership in a position where it was impossible to do anything else. There's also anger from the leader's office that he conducted this media round without any prior warning, and sources have suggested that he had been goading Starmer to sack him. He has a reselection or deselection battle going on in his own constituency and is himself a former officer with the Transport Salaried Staffs Association union who helped run Jeremy Corbyn's leadership campaign. It was an RMT strike yesterday. The RMT is not affiliated to the Labour Party and actually funds parties who often stand in opposition to Labour. But that's not the big story here, I don't think, or at least it's not what I want to talk to you or you to talk to me about most. The Labour Party's position on this. So we talked a lot yesterday, and it was a really good conversation. Thank you. I can't remember whether I said that at the time, but the calls on trade unions from the very first one, who was a 4-decade union man, right through to the end. And we did 2 hours on it when we weren't expecting to. It was an education. It was a real education for me. It doesn't leave anybody listening thinking that all industrial action is justified and all strikes are the work of the angels. Of course not. But, you know, the range of contributions from people who have a proper understanding of the trade union movement was inspirational. And it did help fill some of the gaps in our knowledge when it comes to the question of why the British people have been so successfully turned against trade unions over the years. There are some valid reasons for an increase in scepticism or disillusionment, but a lot of them are probably invalid, because if you were worth billions of pounds and you were keen to be even richer, and one of the ways in which you could become richer would be by paying your workers less, then where would you sit if you happen to own a newspaper on media coverage of strikes designed to ensure that workers earn more? I don't think that's either conspiratorial or particularly rocket science. But there is clearly a problem. There is clearly a problem with trade unions for a lot of British voters. And that is something Keir Starmer has to be very cognizant of. Sadiq Khan, not for the first time, went further than Keir Starmer has done, speaking on this programme earlier today, talking about his support for trade unions and indeed his willingness to appear on picket lines, as he has done in the past, including picket lines involving unions who in August will be potentially taking industrial action on his patch against TfL, calling for a change in TfL's approach on three particular areas: workplace conditions, pensions and pay. So I want to have a grown-up political conversation about a specific political moment now, not about the broad sweep of trades unions or about the Labour Party or about Keir Starmer's leadership or indeed about the sacking of Sam Tarry yesterday. What I want to know is whether or not you as a voter, or not even that, in fact, what I want to know is what you as a voter think about the question, as well as your answer to the question. Should the Labour Party, should the party of opposition, a party born from trade union roots, be supporting the railway strikes? 03456060973. 60973. The party's position, and a part of the problem here may be that this hasn't been articulated as clearly or as widely as perhaps it could have been. The party's position is that the negotiations should take place between government and unions. The front bench position is that the negotiations should take place between government and unions, and their argument would be that if Labour is a party seeking to govern, then it needs to aim to solve disputes and not, as it were, pick a side in a dispute that is unfolding. There are multiple industrial actions on the horizon in coming months. You've got rail workers, postal workers, NHS staff, teachers. There's probably going to be some movement in airline areas. I don't think that Starmer is telling his front bench that they can't support strikes or even stand on picket lines necessarily, but they can't undertake a full media round giving outspoken interviews without A, clearing it in advance with the boss, and B, observing collective cabinet, or in this case shadow cabinet responsibility. And I want to get the words exactly right, and I'm sure I will. But the party's position on this is that the negotiations must be conducted between government and unions. So their argument would be it's not our case, it's not our fight to join. And I find that very interesting. I am now politically very much of the view that these Tories have done so much damage and so much harm to our country and continue to do so. There's a juxtaposition of stories today with the profits of Shell and Centrica being posted. They're posting record-breaking profits while the Conservative Party is engaged in a circular firing squad and the nominal Prime Minister appears to be sort of going around the country doing those experiences that you used to be able to buy for your dad's Christmas present in WH Smith. Do you remember? You could buy a little box and take it to the till, and then you could do a parachute jump the following summer, or go out in a speedboat, or I don't know, abseil down the side of a building. That seems to be what Boris Johnson thinks his job is now, to sort of be a rubbish Annika Rice tribute act, doing weird challenges that no one's asked him to do or particularly wants to see him doing. The mayor mentioned him flying around in a plane or throwing hand grenades. Like Mr. Ben. Do you remember Mr. Ben? Who'd visit a clothing shop every week and he'd put on a new outfit and then walk out the back of the fitting room and he'd actually be doing the job that the outfit described or defined. It is true, even by the standards of Boris Johnson, which are about as low can be. It is, it's laughable to see what he's doing. And that is why, I mean, by hook or by crook, anybody who cares about the country should really just want them out now. But Starmer has to get over the line, and the odds are, as ever, with any Labour leader, whether it's Jeremy Corbyn being hauled over the coals for very questionable events in his past, or whether it's Ed Miliband being accused of being the son of a man who hated England, or the man who hated Britain, which is what the Daily Mail called his dead father. Jeremy Clarkson appearing on Australian television to call Gordon Brown, and forgive me for this, I'm repeating what was said by Jeremy Clarkson, a one-eyed Scottish idiot. I mean, the abuse, the vitriol that is directed at Labour leaders in this country is absolutely epic, and it is often tied in with... yesterday they were trying to give Mick Lynch a hard time for the fact that one of his union officers lives in a council house. I quite what that's got to do with the price of tea in China, or indeed the price of eggs, or indeed the price of railway tickets, or the wages of railway workers, is utterly beyond me. But the Daily Mail School of Politics doesn't care about these things. What it sees is a gap where ignorant anger is, and it thinks, what can I fill that gap in ignorant anger with? And it goes, he lives in a council house. There you go. We can be ignorant and angry about that. It's nuts, right? Got a Prime Minister doing an Annika Rice tribute act, and they're trying to paint a union leader as somehow being dodgy because he lives in a council house. While doing battle with railway companies that are run by men who earn, £500,000 anyway, I digress. You know how it works. You listen to the right show. And that's why Keir Starmer has to be careful. He can't do undergraduate type politics in the way that many of us have seen over the last few years. He can't just come out wearing a badge talking about solidarity. He's got to think about votes, and he's got to think about winning an election. So his actions yesterday will have alienated some elements of what we might call the hard left of the party. But what impact would they have had on you? See, that's the point. There is a sort of rump of people who call themselves hard left, who remain very loyal to the last leader, who spend most of their life on social media sniffing their own farts. They have absolutely nothing to do now with the broader landscape of British politics, and it's sending some of them loopy. It's horrible to see, because if you're spending your life attacking people who vote Labour when you think that you are a Labour activist or a Labour supporter, you're just a little bit weird. But hey-ho, we live in a very weird period of British politics. Keir Starmer's calculation is that you don't want to see his party supporting the strikes. And I'm not sure he's got that right. I'm really not. What do you think? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 60 60 973 is the number you need. The position, and I will stress this, the position is that industrial disputes must be settled by governments and unions. Now, this government's not getting involved in this dispute, so that's already a change in any future Labour administration. But industrial disputes must be settled by governments and unions. I can see the logic in that position, but at this point, until I start picking your brains, I'm not 100% sure. I'm not 100% sure that the two positions are untenable. You can believe that government's role is to negotiate settlements to industrial disputes with unions, while also showing support for some industrial actions, some strikes. What do you think? I hope, and I could be wrong, I hope that this conversation is a lot more nuanced than most of the British media would allow, and most social media would allow, of any political description. I hope it's more nuanced. I hope it's not just I hate Starmer, therefore he's got it wrong, or I think Starmer is pretty much the only hope we've got of getting the Tories out, therefore I'm going to defend what he's done. And I may be flirting a little bit with the second position, so let me clarify. A large part of me, possibly as much as 52%, would quite like to see the Labour Party manning the barricades on some issues, possibly this one. But what do you think? 0345 60 60 973 is the number that you need. And because I still get a few texts like this, I'll read one out for your amusement. The dreadful Tory government is partly on you. This is addressed to me. Your comments and opinions helped destroy Jeremy Corbyn, unquestionably none so blind. I get a couple of these a week now, and they are from people who don't think that the Labour Party's delivery of the worst election result since 1935 has anything at all to do with the then leader of the Labour Party, and everything to do with this particular gob on a stick. And that's what I mean by people who spend their lives on social media sniffing their own farts. They have absolutely nothing to do with the broader political picture in this country anymore, and it's driven them loopy. And one offers them love, sympathy and understanding. But if it's still what gets you out of bed in the morning and you still feel as stupid and as bitter as you do, it's probably time to change your tactics just a bit. And I honestly, I know that sounds mean, but I honestly mean it. It will send you doolally. Squeeze in Stephanie and Wimborne before the news, otherwise this might break my monologue record. This is always what happens after the Speak to Sadiq feature. Stephanie, what would you like to say?
I'm quite nervous, James.
It's only me.
It's only me. I'd just like to say that I think Keir Starmer should support the unions.
Well, he would say that he did. I mean, we're speaking more specifically about this. In fact, we are speaking entirely and exclusive about this specific industrial action, which is being taken by a union that has disaffiliated itself from the Labour Party, that came out very, very strongly in favour of Brexit, and which provides funding sometimes to candidates who stand against Labour candidates. So that's what I meant by nuance.
I know, but I think the general perception is that the Labour Party isn't really trying hard enough to pick a side. I think they're trying to be, like you said, they're trying to, sort of please everybody, I think. And they're also trying to guess what everybody will go for. And I think they've got it wrong. I mean, my father was a Labour member, I am, but I'm not sort of some radical lefty. And I'm not afraid that. And the argument that it seems to be putting out now is you can only support the unions if you're a radical lefty. And I don't think I think there's a lot of people, judging by the response to Mick Lynch, for instance, that are very supportive of them. And I think now it's just becoming a choice between.
I haven't seen polling on support for the rail strikes, and that's probably me being remiss. And I share your view that there seems to be an common warmth being demonstrated towards a trade union leader who is taking effective industrial action. For most of my life, that hasn't really happened. The negativity has rained down upon them and spread around the country. But I have to ask, you are, and I think you are suggesting that the Labour Party should be explicitly in support of all industrial action, which seems to me a bit silly.
Sorry, I think the main problem I've got is that they're always trying to choose a middle ground now, and I don't know how far they're going to go with that. I think, yes, they keep saying we've got to be a party of opposition, but I think a lot of their polling is as a response to how badly the Tories are doing with Johnson and the scandals and everything. So it's really sort of being led by the Tories, and I'm not actually. I didn't. But
we're forgetting the voters he needs to woo, aren't we? Here, rather than the voters that he's got in his back pocket.
And which are they? I mean, I get the impression
they're voters that are frightened of unions, Stephanie. Very simply put, frightened of unions.
Yeah, but maybe that's the problem. They're frightened of unions because people don't understand what unions can bring when you have a far-right government like this one who are attacking all our rights. So we need them more than ever. And what I'm afraid of,
I agree with you.
Kwasi Kwarteng he said in one of his tweets recently that tried to call it a criminal offence. They were his words, and it isn't.
No, I'm in full agreement with you, but I've got this, I need a phrase, because this often happens in politics, and I need a phrase, and I'm sure there is one that someone cleverer than me has already come up with. It's a variation on don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Keir Starmer is trying to get elected in a country where people are frightened of unions. I don't know if saying, but people shouldn't be frightened of unions is an answer to the questions that I'm asking. Do you see what I mean?
True, but what is going to happen after he gets into power, if he did?
Yeah.
How far would he take
Well, he could
that?
tell us, couldn't he?
Afraid to backtrack.
He could reassure some people, and he could reassure others. But speaking up as Sadiq Khan has done, the Labour Party's historic links with the trade union movement, without necessarily joining the picket line of a trade union that is no longer part of the Labour movement, might be an improvement upon what you currently describe. And I think in large part I'm inclined to agree with you. I do have a sense he should be doing something more or something else, but if I can't tell him what it is, that criticism arguably sounds a little bit hollow. Stephanie, thank you. Time now is 1 minute after 11. It's 5 minutes after 11, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's mystery hour today, isn't it, at 12? So we'll take this up certainly to 11:45 when I've got a guest I'm particularly keen for you to meet. It's a fairly straightforward question. Sadiq can't took me by surprise a bit today. He's done that a bit lately. He never used to. I always used to find it quite easy to predict what answers he would give to a question. But given that the Labour leadership has just disciplined a former shadow minister for breaking the party line on industrial action and failing to clear any public interventions and public interviews with the party leadership, which is de rigueur. That is normal practice. You should do that, and you can expect to be punished if you don't. I thought that Sadiq might sort of be a bit mealy-mouthed in answer to the question of whether he'll be joining any picket lines anytime soon, not least because there's due to be industrial action on the London Underground, and he, of course, is the sort of boss in that context. But no, he said, he did say, I'm too busy working to attend picket lines, but if I wasn't, I would be there. He's not, of course, part of the Parliamentary Labour Party's whip, so he is allowed to say that. But it confirmed my thoughts that this would be worth talking about today. What do you want to see the Labour Party do? What do you want to see Keir Starmer do in relation to the rail strikes, and why? Because the backdrop, as far as I'm concerned, the crucial backdrop here is the fact that we live in a country where trade unions have been successfully demonised now for decades. And while everybody sensible and patriotic would rather live in a country where they hadn't been, the simple fact of the matter is that the country in which Keir Starmer wants to get elected is a country where trade unions have been successfully denigrated and demonised in the eyes of millions of voters for decades. Anna is in Kingston. Anna, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
How are you?
Very well, Anna. What's on your mind?
So I'm a Labour voter. I'm also a member of a trade union, the University Trade Union.
Okay.
And I kind of, my feelings towards this are kind of complicated.
Yes, of course. I think they should be.
So as someone, I'm very sympathetic towards the strikes at the moment. I'm very sympathetic towards any industry that does want to go on to take industrial action, because this government's treatment of workers has been horrible, and it looks like it will get worse under whether it's Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak in charge.
Well,
However,
they're almost boasting about who's going to make it worse for people, claiming that when they talk about tax, they claim they're on the side of workers. When they talk about industrial action and strikes, they are competing to see who can be most viciously opposed to work.
Well, exactly. It's just insanity. But I think from Keir Starmer's perspective, he's also probably thinking, the Labour Party has to represent all workers.
Yes.
And that includes workers who are going to be badly affected by strike action.
Yes.
So that will include, for instance, nurses, teachers, and so on. I feel bad because they sound like classic Tory talking points, but if you do have to think about how other workers are going to be affected by these strikes, so he's probably thinking, okay, we just need to make sure that these strikes end as soon as possible for the greater good of the public. I don't know if that makes much sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. No, I tell you what really makes sense, which is what I think you were conveying, is that there's nothing Keir Starmer can do to accelerate the conclusion of this dispute.
Yeah.
So why would he get involved in it in a way that would tell the people who are opposed to this action that he is on the side of the people who are undertaking this action? Because if he was in government, he'd have to take a position on it, because it is in his gift to bring it to a swifter resolution or to string it out, as Conservative governments have historically done with industrial action for political reasons. But that's
and are clearly planning to do it.
Looks that way,
again.
Doesn't it? It looks that way. It's like the Ridley report has come back to haunt us from 1977, as that brilliant author who rang in yesterday reminded. Okay, I like that. And do you know what? That was the bit that was missing, wasn't it, from the party line being that these disputes must be settled by unions and governments. And so a Labour politician using it as an opportunity to appear on television cameras is clearly not motivated by the best interests of the Labour Party. He's motivated by what he thinks is his best opportunity for a bit of telly time.
Yeah, I was going to say, with regards to Sam Tarry, like, I know when the RMT were taking strike action in June, there were several other shadow cabinet members who did go on strike. Not on strike, who did go on the picket lines. But none, I mean, all of them, as far as I'm aware, basically just posted a picture on Twitter, and that was it. They didn't go on all the media rounds.
They weren't giving, giving interview to every journalist that asked for it in a way that was clearly, and either it was done deliberately or it was undertaken by someone not wise enough to realise that it would look deliberate as an attempt to undermine the party leadership. Anna, thank you. I think that's crucial, actually. What would Keir Starmer gain politically? When I interviewed him, and you can listen to the interview on Full Disclosure, and I really do recommend it, not because I did it, but because I think we got to parts that perhaps other interviews haven't reached. He's almost, what's the word I want? He's almost preternaturally immune to some of the normal elements of politics, to what you might call politicking. And this is, I think, both a weakness and a strength. Because he wouldn't see it as. I tell you what, I met an entrepreneur recently, and she made me feel a bit stupid because we were talking about politics, and I think I mentioned this to you already. She talked to me about all she really wants from politicians is execution. All she cares about is what they are going to do for the things that she cares about and the sector that she works in. And she does a lot of social support work as well, on top of running successful businesses. And that is nothing to do with most of the politics that we talk about on the programme, which is very personality driven, and it's very often quite emotional and this looks bad and he's great and and that is what wins elections. Otherwise, Boris Johnson you'd never have heard of him if that kind of absolutely unsubstantive, meaningless stuff didn't actually win elections. Starmer's the polar opposite. I say it again, it's a weakness and a strength, but he will be looking at this without even almost being aware of a PR element to the dispute or how it might make me look, or how his rationale here is, doesn't matter whether I come out in favour of the strikes or whether I condemn them. It's not going to make the blindest bit of difference to the execution of conflict resolution. It's not going to make it end quicker or end faster. There might be an argument to say that if he stuck his colours to the mast really firmly, then the government would string it out for even longer so that they could pretend it was his fault. So that, again, immune to the politicking of it. Utterly immune. In some ways, possibly you could level a similar description at Jeremy Corbyn from a completely different perspective. Is not interested in the sort of cut and thrust of personality politics that unfortunately defines who wins elections in this country. So he's looking at it and he's thinking, well, what is going to bring about a resolution? And the answer to that in terms of what he can and can't do is nothing at all. I think that's true. And it's only 11:13, so you've got plenty of time to completely dismantle what I think was just a penny drop moment. Lynn's in Isleworth. Lynn, what would you like to say?
Hi, morning, James.
I was in the London Apprentice the other night. That's a lovely pub, isn't it?
It is a lovely pub, yes. It is a lovely pub.
Sorry, a bit of a digression. What did you ring in to say?
No. Well, I just rang in to say that, I've been a trade unionist all my working life. I'm retired now. I worked in the NHS for 47 years and was a rep for Unison.
Were you at West Mid?
Yeah.
I was there yesterday. So we were very well looked after, so thank you for giving me an opportunity to say so.
Yeah, it's a lovely local hospital. And I was invited along with other trade union reps to speak at a local meeting last night about what possibly would happen with the NHS and what would if staff rejected the pay offer. And there were other trade union reps there from the buses, TfL and the post office workers. An hour before I went to that meeting, the news flash came up on the phone that this MP had been sacked for going to a picket line. And
no, that's not what he's been sacked for. Because there's plenty of them have been to picket.
Or making a statement, wasn't it, or something? making a statement.
It was for doing a media round without telling the Secretary of State for Transport what he was doing, and for speaking in a way that is at odds with the party line. So he's defied collective cabinet responsibility, and he's defied the requirements of his job. That would be the Labour Party, which the job is in the gift of the Labour Party leader, and that would be their account of why he's been demoted.
Yeah, agree. And I didn't know this MP from Adam, but I listened to him yesterday morning, and I didn't think he said anything too controversial. I think the rail workers have a really legitimate reason for doing what they're doing, and it sort of upsets me that what's brought into the argument is, well, they earn 50,000 but nurses get 29,000, which I don't think is a legitimate argument.
Well, of course it's not a legitimate argument. It's straight out of the Daily Mail, Lynn.
Yeah, so that's the reason I was sort of upset. I thought, well, this guy, I don't know him. He's now been sacked for whatever reason.
Yeah, but when you were a union rep, and if you went out and gave interviews that were at odds with the union position on a given issue, you'd expect to lose your role as a rep.
I agree. But
that's all that's happened. All that's happened. You stay a member. You can stay a member. You still pay your subs.
Yeah.
But you're not, unless you're members. Sorry, carry on. Yes.
We're in such difficult times. We've got a government that are threatening to make strikes illegal.
You are.
We've got the possibility of people getting a £500 a month energy bill. And for me, the Labour Party, they were born out of the trade union movement. It's like the NHS, the great Nye Bevan, passionate about healthcare for people who, and after what he'd seen in Wales, which was that people suffered terribly, especially women, from having no access to healthcare. And I just feel all the passion is going out of politics.
This is the perfect call for
have any passion.
No, this is the perfect call for what I was talking about just before you came on, and I didn't know what you were going to say. But this is the criticism that you're levelling at Starmer is that thing I described as a weakness and a strength, is that he doesn't do the emotional side of things. He only does the executional side of things. So he's not interested in whether or not you think he's passionate or not. I think he is actually a passionate man. I think he's driven in many ways by his childhood experiences. But he's only interested in what can and can't be achieved. That's the lawyer. What can and can't be achieved. And in answer go on, carry on.
I agree, and I don't think he's a bad man, but I'm talking generally about the Labour Party today.
Yes,
the whole conversation is about this MP being...
Oh, it's not. It's not. I was happy not to mention him.
No, not with you, but I'm talking about generally.
Well, that's right-wing media trying to use it as a wedge issue to claim that Starmer's lost control.
The NHS is being gradually privatised. You've got people using their savings to get operations, which I don't blame them as individuals for doing that. But there are so many important issues, and maybe I am passionate about certain subjects, particularly the NHS and its staff. Last week you had Jeremy Hunt doing one of your shows, and I wanted to throw the radio out of the window.
I'm glad you didn't, because you wouldn't be able to listen to me this week.
To you today. But he was behaving as if he'd not been part of this government and not been. I know.
Well, they all do that. You've got come and look at the leadership election. Now you've got the Chancellor and the Foreign Secretary and Boris Johnson's administration competing as to who can rubbish Boris Johnson's administration the most, or indeed the last 12 years of Tory rule. It's the shaggification of politics, Lynn.
You have Stephen Barclay, James, making an announcement last week about the pay review body award, and stating that cleaners and porters and such people would be getting a good whack, £1,400. They're not even directly employed by the NHS.
I'm late for the break. I've got to go. Please don't throw your radio out the window. I've got to go to the break. But I think you're talking about feelings, and I actually share a lot of the feelings you describe. Keir Starmer's only interested in delivering the stuff that actually makes change, not, and this is a weakness, not talking about it in a passionate and an inspirational way. I'd urge you to have a listen to that full disclosure, because I think you'll see a side of him that you'll like and that you haven't seen yet. And that's his fault. It's 11:19. 21 minutes after 11, I've heard a whisper that Liz Truss is minded to keep Nadine Dorries in her position as Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport if her leadership bid is successful. So a couple of the latest greatest hits from Dorries, claiming today that the Commonwealth Games, which open in Birmingham today, is the first time that we've seen an event of such scale since the Olympic Games were in London in 2012. That's the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport there, utterly ignorant of the fact that the Commonwealth Games were in Glasgow, or possibly ignorant of the fact that Glasgow is in the United Kingdom. I'd give you 52% for one of those examples of ignorance and 48% chance for the other. I say 52% likely she had no idea the Commonwealth Games were in Glasgow in 2014, and 48% that she's got no idea Glasgow is in the United Kingdom. Was it Rishi Sunak claiming that Darlington was in Scotland the other day when asked why he was paying so little attention to Scottish issues? And when criticised for her bizarre intervention about Liz Truss's earrings the other day, she's defended herself by saying it's about who voters can relate to and who voters think they have walked in their shoes. This is one of Boris Johnson, former Bullingdon Club member Boris Johnson's most tireless supporters, claiming that voters want people who have had similar life experiences to them. The inimitable Jonathan Pye points out that this is presumably, we could all relate to Boris Johnson because we've all set fire to a few £50 notes in front of homeless people. After all, who hasn't? 23 minutes after 11 is the time. But we're not talking about the Tories today. We're talking about the Labour Party and the simple question, but the answers are anything but, of whether or not he, and indeed they, should be offering full-throated support for the current industrial action on our railways. I think the answer's no. But I'd like to hear a few more yeses. Teresa is in Brighton. Teresa, what would you like to say?
Broadly, yes, in answer to that question.
Yes.
I think Starmer could have anticipated that this would be a wedge issue. He could have anticipated that not making it explicitly clear the difference between being on a picket line and doing a media round, unsanctioned and unsupervised, was going to be a problem. He's got, there's burgeoning...
I don't know that I agree with you on that. I think this lad went rogue.
Well, I don't know. I think we could have predicted. I don't know
there's a
what
big
your
difference.
Twitter feed's like, James, but mine is full of very, very disgruntled Corbynites going on and on about the Ford report and how Corbyn's been completely exonerated and Starmer suppressed it, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, but they are the people and the very specific constituency you've just described are the people that I was talking about earlier, spending their whole lives on social media, sniffing their own farts while being of utter irrelevance to the broader political picture. So